Hi, I'm Charles Galda, President of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action program, where we talk with New England leaders about the imperative to make disciples, do justice, and foster unity to share Jesus and transform New England. This week, I'm excited to have a special guest back with us. Ed Gaskin is the Executive Director of Greater Grove Hall Main Streets in Boston, and he's also leading a project in partnership with the Massachusetts Society to Aid Discharged Prisoners and Vision New England to help the church understand the need and our role in what's called reentry or returning citizens, to help people who are leaving prison and returning back to their neighborhoods. And so, Ed, thanks again for being with us again.
Thank you.
And so before we jump in, Ed, just to give folks a little context about who you are, what is Greater Grove Hall Main Streets and what are you doing and seeing there?
So Greater Grove Hall Main Streets is one of the 20 main streets in Boston. Main streets are independent 501c3 organizations, and we receive a contract with the city as a vendor to provide services primarily around economic development. The original concept came from the government when they were trying to make small Western and Midwestern towns where they only had a main street basically not go out of existence. And then the mayor, Menino, years ago applied for the same money, and he's basically tried to use it to revitalize neighborhoods. And so I have the Greater Grove Hall area, which is one of the more economically challenged areas in the city. And to answer your second part in terms of what we're seeing, so I work with a lot of the stores and the businesses in my area on my day-to-day basis. I have mostly barbershops, beauty salons, nail salons, convenience stores, bodegas, non-profit organizations, and storefront churches. That's kind of the economic mix in my neighborhood. But I also use it as a platform to talk about larger economic issues. And so one of the things that's happening, as you know, there's a big boom in the state of Massachusetts on biotech, life sciences. And so there's been some building of some life sciences labs and things like that in the Roxbury area. There's a place called Nubian Square Ascends, which is 200,000 square feet. And that's going to be partnered with the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology. I'm very excited about that. Recently, another project, My City at Peace, by another Christian minister, Reverend Jeff Brown, is part of that team, and that's also bringing online a bunch of life sciences. And so part of the reason, and there's an issue there called biomanufacturing. And so what I'm interested in is that these are the kind of jobs that would come to the city. They don't require 2-year, 4-year vocational training, but they have high salaries. And, some of the people, like there's things called advanced manufacturing, which I've been interested in for a long time. And there's a thing called additive printing. So you see people do 3D printing. Well, they can 3D print like a kidney and a bladder and stuff. And so what they've done is, if you're making that, you're actually manufacturing those things. That's a manufacturing job. And so it's not like the old days that it's dark and dirty and dangerous, but it's a manufacturing job. It plays well. You don't have to go into a lot of debt to get to the degree. And so part of what I'm interested in are jobs like that. I recently worked on a piece of legislation that made the clean wind energy legislation more open to minorities of color in terms of diversity, in terms of supplying businesses, etc. So that was big. And without going through the whole list, I've kept my eye on the cannabis industry. We have 2 equity cannabis businesses in our district. My fear on that one is that those are going to be like casinos. Everybody thought that if they had their own cannabis business, all these revenues were going to spring up and it was going to change neighborhoods. But I haven't seen it so far. I haven't seen the state house reporting that there's tons of new cannabis, dollars coming in. So anyway, and then of course, one of our big initiatives over the last couple of years has been focusing on how do we increase the number of Black technology founders? As you know, in terms of venture capital and things like that, Blacks still only get like 1% of all the money. And then where there's an opportunity. So Professor Jeff Busgang just recently did a report where he showed there's going to be $200 trillion of economic opportunity created in the next 10 years in the areas of AI, blockchain, robotics, battery technology, etc. And so I've written on this a few times, and now the question is, how do we enable Blacks to found businesses in these big high-tech sectors that we know are going to be successful because VCs are looking for opportunities in those areas, as opposed to what tends to be the thing is trying to convince VCs to take a chance on a Black entrepreneur in a field that they may or may not know as well. And so there's lots of other barriers when you're in a different area, but that looks like it's an area that has promise. And hopefully I'll have an op-ed on that soon. But that was quickly some of the big things. There's a few more, but if I talk about what I do on all the economic development, we won't get to any of the other stuff.
That's fascinating, though. I learned a bunch of stuff and I didn't know that you did. I knew some of it, but I didn't know all of that. That's fascinating. Thank you. And I did mention in the introduction that Ed is doing some work on prison reentry work. And if you missed our episode on that, you can find it on our YouTube channel or wherever you're listening to this. But Ed, you've done something that I thought was a little unusual and worth hearing about. And you've been visiting churches of all different traditions, majority cultures, stripes. And I thought it would be just fascinating to hear what your takeaways were from that, or what themes you noticed and learned from it. I always think about, we go to our churches and we become blind to being a new person to the church. I remember when we got a new pastor, he starts putting signs up and stuff like that. I'm like, why are you doing that? And he said, well, where's the nursery? And I said, what's downstairs? And he said, and then where do you go to Sunday school? And I go, well, you go upstairs. And then he said, and how do you get to the sanctuary? I said, well, you go down this hall and then through fellowship hall, and then you turn right. I'm like, okay, I get why we're putting signs up, but you don't think about it, right? Until you get new fresh eyes looking at it and saying, okay, you're missing a bunch of, and there were other things we had to do too. But I'd love to hear, first, why did you do this? What made you think to do it?
Okay, so I think you'll appreciate what I did if I just give a smidgen of background. So I was a Christian, and for lack of a better word, I became a Christian through like the 4 spiritual laws. In college, I went to things like Campus Crusade. I went to a Bible church, as they said, it was an Independent Fundamentalist Churches of America. And one person told me that stand for I fight Christians anywhere. And so I went to those I went to basically white conservative Christian churches. And in college, I went to the Bible church in a day, and I went to like a sort of like a liberal social justice-y kind of prayer group, because that didn't conflict with my Campus Crusade or Navigators group during the week. Anyway, I chose to go to a seminary like Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and much to the dismay of my professors, I was a business major in college, but I was also a world religion major, and I had got accepted to the University of Chicago, and my professors just thought I was really making a horrible mistake as to why I would go to a little teeny Bible school when I could go to someplace like University of Chicago and major in religion that was much more prestigious, much more academically sound, or whatever. But I thought it was consistent with my faith, so I go to a place like Gordon Conwell. Now, part of the reason why I came to Gordon Conwell, as opposed to Trinity or Fuller or some other places, is because at least they had a few courses in the syllabus that touched on social justice, and they had Hume. And so I sort of like brought that part with me.
And sorry to interrupt, but for folks who don't know, CUME is the Boston campus of Gordon Conwell.
That's correct. And so I basically went to 12th Baptist my first year. And then from that year on, I went to People's Baptist Church. So I attended there for over 25 years as an associate minister and doing all the things that associate ministers do on the staff. And then I eventually left to go to Roxbury Presbyterian Church with Reverend Liz Walker. So when Liz retired in December, it was the first time that I had to even think about where I was going to go to a church. And so they were bringing in guest ministers and pastors and stuff like that while they were doing a search to figure out who's going to be permanent. I thought this would be a great time to visit some other churches. In other words, if they're bringing in other pastors or preachers here, I might as well go there and hear some other people. And And part of it, to be honest with you, was a little bit more existential. Can I say that on this show? Because obviously I had seen the Christian right and like the insurrection. And so if you think about it, December 31st roughly is when Liz leaves, and then January 6th is when you have this insurrection, and all the Christians that either supported it or justified it or whatever. And I just said, uh, maybe I'm just maybe I'm just not part of the church anymore, because I just don't. I'm not on the same page. Like I'm not really seeing this. So that's why I meant it was a little bit more existential. I said, so let me just see what's out there. And I just started visiting the churches that, I like some of the ones that you provided. I went to a couple of the Chinese churches. So I went to Barry's church. What's the Boston Chinese? So I went to those ones. I'd already been to Lion of Judah before, but I had went there again recently. Both I watched it online and been in person. I went to Sergio's church. I can't remember the name of it.
Harvest Ministries.
And so this was my chance to go to all these things and see this stuff. And I came back with a much different impression. And that's, I think I'd love to talk about today.
And so what I heard in that, and I'm guessing there's probably other churches, I heard you went to some Chinese heritage churches, Latino heritage churches, and Lion of Judah, very multi-ethnic, although heavily Latino.
I went to Paul Atwater's church.
Okay. So a mix of all different things. And so you were hardly noticed in that context as a 6'4" black man, right?
Well, I used to use that as my measurement when I would visit a church for the first time. So if I went to let's say I went to a white church, let's say I was visiting a different city or whatever, and I used to use that as a measurement because I would wonder, will anybody come up and say hi to me during the service? And I would say, because it's fairly obvious that I'm not a regular here. And that would tell me how welcome they wanted to make me feel or not feel.
Yeah. Yep. I remember the first time.
I remember one time I went to a church and I got this feeling, I couldn't prove it, that they were so robotic. It's like the pastor said, we must greet our visitors. So they like all did this. So there was no expression. There was no like energy behind it. It was like, we have to do this because we've been told this is what we do.
I remember the first church, I didn't grow up in a Christian church. And so the first time we went to a church, we visited this tiny little Baptist church. And we didn't know that everybody would know each other because we'd never been in a context like that. And we sat down and somebody walks right up to us and they welcomed us, very friendly. But they were like, well, we know you, hey, it's your first time here. Just want to say welcome. Glad you're here. And we're like, does it show? How does it show? How can they tell we don't belong here?
Well, I had a experience last Sunday. I was in a different church. I was in a small Bible church in a small town. And after the service is over, the guy who's sitting next to me says, hi, my name is such and such, trying to introduce himself. So, and I said, oh, my name is Ed Gaskin. Then the second thing he said was, are you saved? And I said, well, no small talk. We're cutting right to the chase here. He knows what his assignment is.
Why doesn't he? So I don't know what's the best way to talk about what you experienced and what you learned? Is it visit by visit, or is it more thematically? Or
I think it was a couple of things. First of all, is like when I went to places like Reservoir and High Rock, whatever, I saw more diversity, and it started to tell me, okay, what I'm seeing on TV is not what's really happening in the church. There's a lot more diversity that's going on, and in other words, what gets reported on the news? Because typically, like I remember one year I was in Dallas and I saw a car that had a big 2 bumper stickers. One that said "I love Jesus," like I heart Jesus, and it said "I heart Cowboys." So it was like Jesus and the Cowboys were on the same level. And so I used to see the same thing about "I love God, I love Trump," the same kind of thing. And so that's sort of what I was reacting to when I said, geez, I don't know if I fit anymore. And so by going to these other places, I said, okay, we're not all like that. Like that's not what I see on the news each night is not really an accurate reflection of the body of Christ or what we're doing, or evangelicals even. So you know how you talked recently about the definition of evangelical, about the creed, the conversion, and stuff like that? I said I haven't changed one iota in terms of believing that stuff. So from that part, I'm like down the line evangelical, but um, I'm not. I'm not. You know, I don't see critical race theories of boogeyman or all these other kinds of things, all the cultural stuff.
Yeah.
And also, what I would say is that the churches that I just mentioned and more, the political discussions are much different, if I can say that.
Mm.
So, for example, I went to, like I just mentioned, to Harvest Ministries. Great church. I heard Sergio's wife preach. Great sermon. Loved it. Would go there any Sunday. Could be a member there. But I also know that, as he says, they support former President Trump because they thought they were pro-life and pro-family. And so I think that one of the things that Vision New England talks about is that we can have different political views. It doesn't have to be so contentious. And so we can all, worship, serve. We can do all these kind of things together. We can have differences of opinion. And that doesn't polarize us into say, well, they're the enemy because they think differently than we do. When I was talking to, Roberto Miranda, I understood that he had a different view on immigration than I did, but I really respected the work that he was doing on immigration. And again, it wasn't contentious. It's just like, you're doing it one way, I'm doing it another way, but we all are trying to achieve the same goal. And I could be, I don't know, like I said, all part of the same family. We're all sort of in this together, and it felt more like a body. I think one of the things you asked me, some of the observations, I used to always hear about, we have to have, multicultural churches. That's the ultimate example.
Mm.
But after visiting enough ethnic specific churches, I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, if that works better, like a lot of places, they'll have an older one that just has like maybe the language, like there's a language issue. So let's say, like, using example, one might be in Mandarin and versus an English one. So I said, I don't know. I don't see that the ultimate goal is to have a multi-ethnic church, as opposed to whatever church you would want to attend, that you felt welcome and that you can be part of the body and that you're not going to be excluded. So I've seen white, let's say Christians, who say, I want to join a black church. They do it. They become members of the choir, and they do all kinds of stuff, and it's not really an issue. And I said, I think that's the goal, is that wherever you want to worship and serve God, that it should just be welcome and embraced. And if you want to hold a leadership position there and you meet the criteria that they have, then you shouldn't be excluded from that.
Yeah. I think many of us, though, have to go in and understand that our expectations are going to be different because we do church differently in different parts of the church, and words mean different things and roles are different. And so we need to go in with some humility, especially if we're white going into a majority black church or a Latino church. I've certainly learned it's a different experience, and we need to be ready to not make everybody do it our way.
Well, one of the things I realized is that there's a lot of similarity in terms of the music that people are singing, all the praise worship. So somebody says they're all Harvest song. I don't know what Harvest, whatever it is, but somebody said they're all using Harvest stuff. So the praise, in other words, if you didn't know better, that music is the same in all the churches I was just describing. That's why I said, geez, doesn't anybody sing hymns anymore or anthems or like, where's like
I am so glad you said that.
I said, well, obviously I'm old school because I got all this gray hair, but I think you throw a hymn there, throw me a bone, like just for the old people. But anyway, I understand, you're trying to reach a different congregation, different age, different people, et cetera, and you don't have to go back to the 1600s to sing what those guys sang. But it was one of my observations. And also, I have to say that I still, when I'm in a black church, I still love the gospel music and all that. And you don't really get that in these other churches. And I laughed because I was in a black church recently, and I joked and I said, this is how I knew it was a black church. They were taking prayer requests, and the first prayer request was for the safety of the workers at Boston Children's Hospital because they'd been under attack for the I think transgender services or something like that. And then the second one was they were praying that when the orange line started the next day that it was working properly. so I said, okay, that's a group that's not a typical white church prayer.
Was there any place, and you don't have to name the church, but there was any place that you felt like you weren't welcome?
I don't believe so. I think the issue was the extent of it. So, if I'm walking in, like, so in other words, and that's sometimes that's more of the role of the usher. So, is somebody going to help me get to a seat that's more in the middle, or am I just going to sit in the back because I don't want to inconvenience anybody and be out of the way? Or like, I don't know, because a lot of these churches now don't have programs, so I don't know where I've just walked in or what's next, or right. So all those kind of things that were like old school ushers and greeters and programs and all that. Okay, so you did away with that. Okay, but for somebody like myself who's just walking in here, I have no idea what the order of service is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know. Should I walk in now? Should I not walk in, etc.?
That's a good point. And so when you say varying level of degrees, was it that structural stuff, or was it how we in the pews interact with someone we don't know? Do we?
I think I think it goes back to your original comment. So if somebody says, "Oh my God, I'm really glad to see you," and then two other people say that, and if somebody comes over and shakes my hand, I'm thinking, "Oh, gee, like they might really be glad to see me here." If nobody says anything, or somebody says, welcome or whatever, then I'm thinking, okay. It's not that I don't feel welcome. It's just that clearly they're not as enthusiastic or exuberant about my rolling in that day.
Gotcha. What, thinking about your experience in all these different churches, is there some stuff that you would say to us, hey, stop doing this, or you need to be doing this?
I would say this is a rule across the board, black, white, whatever. I would say don't leave the greeting and welcoming to just the ushers or the mandated passing of the peace or greeting period. So you have the obligation to say hello to your neighbor or welcome your neighbor, and people do that because that's what they've just been directed to do. If you're there, say whether it's your job or not, and you see somebody that you don't recognize or whatever, say hi and welcome and say, like, we would like to have you back. Even if you don't want to have them back, you should probably say we would like to have you back, because that's the right thing. Like, we really would like to have you back. So that would be my biggest thing, is don't just say, well, that's not my job. I'm just here to worship and praise, whatever. And so if there's a visitor, there's somebody else on the visitors committee and they're filling out their cards or whatever. Like there's a whole group responsible for that. So that's not on me.
You're reminding me of a little old lady at our church in Connecticut named Barbara Jessup. And I remember her saying what she did every Sunday after church is she looked for the strangest looking person there and would go over and welcome them. And I when she told me that, I said, well, and I appreciated you welcoming me, Barbara. but it's, most of us are shying away from that person who we don't know, let alone look strange, right? And she just loved Jesus, and she loved other people, and she wanted to make sure those people knew they were welcome too.
Yeah, I think that's important, because some of it entertained angels unaware.
Right. Amen. And so what was kind of any big takeaway, Ed, that you would say, hey, this one, the church needs to think about this?
No, if I was going to say this, and this, I don't mean to make a gratuitous plug. I think where Vision New England has come down with your principles in terms of disciples and justice and unity.
Yep.
I really think, so let me just back up. When I heard that the first time, I said, oh, they did a piece of research and, that sounds good. And I like it because I agree with it. But I honestly feel that it's reflecting what I'm seeing out there.
Mm.
And I really feel that's the right path. And that's kind of like I can live with that. Like within those parameters, I can live with that. So before I used to think, well, there's those Lausanne Covenant churches.
Oh,
Nobody even
yeah.
knew what the Lausanne Covenant was, 1 and 2, whatever. And so it was too abstract. But I again, I want to congratulate Vision New England because I really felt that that reflects this. So while I talked about all those different diversities between white church, black, um, Hispanic, Asian, that's a surface difference. And then there's some similarities. When I talked about the praise and worship music, seem to be very similar. The preaching is very similar. I know they won't say the preaching is similar because all the preachers have the style, but when you're used to hearing people preach the gospel, they can preach different ways, different techniques, different styles, but it's still something that resonates. You don't go like, geez, I've never heard that before. Or
Mm.
like, is that in the Bible?
Yeah.
Like it still kind of resonates with you. And so that's what I meant by the unity part. A lot of these places all have great uh, things that they're doing in terms of justice, one way or the other. So it's not like they don't see that as part of the gospel or they have to be convinced. Like when I first started in seminary, they said, well, there's those who focus on personal salvation and those who focus on social justice. And then if you try to say, can't there be a both and, then they'd be like, well, I don't know. That could be liberation theology. That could be Marxist. There was such a leeriness, because of the social gospel in the 20th century. So there was so many red flags and caution on doing anything that was justice oriented. You just wanted to stay over on the other side. And I've always felt that that was wrong.
Mm.
And so I think now there's again, I'm just saying with what Vision New England has said and some of the stuff I've experienced, that seems to be consistent across the board.
And thanks for saying that. I do appreciate it. And I appreciate that it comes through. You're reminding me of a pastor's gathering. I won't say where or who that I was invited to speak at. And whatever title I had given my talk, it had something to do. It had justice in the title. And I don't remember even what it was at this point. And they said, well, we'd like to change that word. We don't want that because that would be off-putting to people. And this was a gathering of pastors. And I said to them, I said, guys, it's our word. There's no justice outside of Jesus. We can't give this one up too. But we're shy of it because of the baggage we associate with it, and as opposed to latching onto it because it's ours.
Well, see, so if you were in my class, this is an example. I'd say, I don't know how you get there. So if you have holiness, in holiness, righteous, justice, sanctification, those words are all related in Hebrew. And I said, I don't know how you have justification and the entire, law and prophets and the sort of like the conviction for not following the law. Like, how do you have anything like that without any justice?
Yeah.
Like God's justice, God's mercy, God's grace. To me, you've got to get justice in there. That seems like such a core. So I asked one church, I said, don't you think that justice is a fundamental of the faith? Just like Trinity, the deity of Christ, second coming, bodily resurrection. I said, to me, justice is what is core to the Christian faith as those other doctrines.
Yeah. I heard Tim Keller say one time that if you don't think justice is a big deal, it's because you've never suffered injustice, right? Because when that happens, you want justice. And so I agree with you. So I think we need to latch onto. I think what we're afraid of is because of our culture, the way we deal with everything is if I say the word justice, then then you attribute 27 things to me. And I didn't say any of those things. And it doesn't mean we agree on what's just and unjust. It doesn't mean we agree on solutions, but justice is ours and it has a meaning. And there's some things we would agree, we have to agree on in that. Is that fair?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things is, I've noticed how people feel differently about King over time. And Martin Luther King, and they're more embracing of King now than they were then. And they talk about King and his relationship with Heschel. But Heschel and all the prophets and stuff, I said, that's all biblical stuff. I mean, he's talking about the prophets. He's not coming in from like another religion or something. I was like, those are the prophets. Those are like our guys. Yeah. Well, I had an interesting thought experiment the other day when I was actually talking to a director of spiritual formation. And they made the comment that they, when they go to their next church, they're talking about church hunting and whatever, and we're talking about churches today. They said the first church they were going to go to was one that had a rainbow sign in the front. And they said the rationale was because I know that's going to be a caring, compassionate group of people. And so I'm like, okay, I see where they're coming from. And if I saw a church that just said Jesus saves on the front, I might be a little bit more cautious as to what I was getting into. Like I went to a church recently that had the, you have those yard signs. So they had the yard signs for their political candidates in front of the church. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not sure I feel comfortable with that, but okay. And so the point was on this thought experiment, what does it mean if I see a rainbow sign in front of a church, a Black Lives Matter sign, a Jesus Saves sign, or if I see a sign that had all of them? So I said, if I saw a church that had all of them, I would definitely go there because I'd figure out how are they sorting through all this stuff.
Yeah, I think the hard thing we need to really focus on in what you're saying is that our politics gets in the way of people knowing Jesus.
I agree. Because I said it's a shame that if I see the Jesus Saves sign, I don't automatically go there, but I'm afraid of what kind of Christians might be there. And so I think, I might take a pass on that one. When it should be just the other way around. The one that I know is proclaiming Jesus should be the one I make a beeline to because I know where they are.
Yeah. And that's great words to end on. Ed, thank you so much for being with us again. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I look forward to coming back again.
Thanks. And we're already talking about when. And so thanks again. I'd like to thank our producer, Jess Mangano, and our listeners. I hope this dialogue helped us understand what our role is in being the people of God who do the work of God. When we look at church and when people perceive what we do in church and perceive our politics and not wanting that to get in the way of Jesus, because we want people to know Jesus. And so visit visionnewengland.org for past episodes and resources, and click donate to partner with us and support the work we do. This program is brought to you by the friends at our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.